I started out in New York, and what I realized, there's a fear of failure and there's a fear of being or appearing vulnerable, is that the whole agile community was focusing way too much on the boots on the ground, the engineers. And I was seeing a chasm between what leadership thought was happening and what was really happening. I 100% agree. For decades, we've been saying, need to do more with less. Need to do more with less.
Yes.
AI, our latest big technology boost in the past year. I just write down some of my thoughts, and it really takes that blank page and crafts it to something that I can now take, edit, and move forward.
Yeah. All right, Jim Saliba, welcome to the Expert Speaker Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We are here in beautiful Guatemala. In the background, we have your Post-it notes from your system, and we're here at Lake Atitlan. And I would love to share with our listeners your story. So how did you become the Silicon Valley executive coach?
Well, I started out in New York. I was a programmer, and I grew through the ranks and became a VP in a large software company. Decided that I wanted something different and went out consulting. Mainly helping a lot of organizations change how they were doing software development from slow, older waterfall method to agile. And what I realized is that the whole agile community was focusing way too much on the boots on the ground, the engineers. And I was seeing a chasm between what leadership thought was happening and what was really happening. And I could not really use any of the agile techniques with them, because anytime you use those words, they say, oh, no, that's not us. That's for the engineers.
Uh-huh.
So I started working with leaders more, changing my vocabulary to make it more conducive for them and have them understand what was really happening. So that led me to still consulting. Sometimes I go in as a contractor, come back in for a while. That might make me a regular employee for a few years. The thing is this, change has an arc.
Mm-hmm.
That arc is basically 2 to 3 years. And at 2 to 3 years, the company will say, praise the Lord, we have changed, where we are now agile, whether they were or not. And I get bored, so I'm off to the next company. Since COVID, I went out on my own, exclusively talking to leaders, mostly tech, but all kinds of organizations. I have a COO of a Norwegian transportation company. I have executives in the medical field. And the thing is, we're human. So we still have that same problems, the same components that we need to get over. Mm-hmm. And that kind of brings me here today.
Cool. So it's funny you mentioned that you say the word agile, they say, no, that's not for us. And you had to kind of shift your vocabulary to fit their suitable language.
Yes.
What's this? So first, I'd like to hear you explain, like, what's the difference between waterfall planning and agile methodology? And then how do you describe agile to executives in a way that they say, okay, this is something I want to work on?
Okay, so the whole waterfall method came out of a paper that was written by Royce, I forget his last name, in 1970, about large software development. Now, the only people that were doing large software development in the 70s was basically the government, especially Department of Defense. So he wrote a paper on how to do software development in that big contract DoD world. And first you go out and you get the requirements.
Sure.
That's it.
Yeah.
Then you go down to the next step and you say, okay, now I have the requirements. I have to design this whole thing. Now that I have the design, I'm going to go down to the next step and I'm going to build the whole thing. And then I'm going to go down and test the whole thing. And then I'm going to give it to the customer, and the customer is going to say, that's not exactly what I wanted. I know that's what I said, but that's not really what I meant. So you have to go back and fix things, and you go back up to the top, get new requirements, and you go down to this waterfall thing. Agile came around much later, I would say the early 2000s. So basically it's 20 years old now. And it goes with the idea of, I don't need to deliver the whole thing. Why don't I just deliver a small piece?
Yeah.
See, get feedback. Do you like it? Do you not like it?
Yeah.
Well, let me do the next small piece and the next small piece. If you look at your smartphone, you see this all the time. How many times do you see your apps update with just a small change? They did a couple bug fixes. They might have changed a button, added in a tiny new feature. They're rarely changing the whole thing like we used to do way back when.
Yeah.
So these small, very frequent updates is more of the agile method. So now if I were a CFO, and I look at the old way, I'm laying out money to develop this thing for at least a year, and Department of Defense probably more, until I give this thing and deliver it, and then I start making money. From an agile point of view, I put out a little thing, I start making a little bit of money. I put out a little bit more, I make a little bit more money. Now, if both of them have the same level of success, I might get to the same point when it's all done. But in the agile way, I never laid out nearly as much money as I did the old way. So from a financial point of view, agile is much better. Plus, it gives me the effect of making sure I'm staying with what the customer wanted, because I'm constantly getting feedback.
Well, it makes sense in a 1970s world, big organization, big budget, that you have lots of time to go through all these steps. I think it's fair to say that the world is changing faster now than it's ever changed before. And I also think it's fair to assume that it's going to keep changing faster. So what do you make of that for leaders?
I 100% agree that it's changing. For decades, we've been saying, need to do more with less. Need to do more with less.
Yes.
Now it's not just once in a while. It's all the time. You always have to do more with less.
Yeah.
It's a mantra now.
Yeah.
So what that means most of the time is I have to focus on the right things and cut out everything else. But technology is also coming to help us. And as technology comes to help us do these things, it allows us to do more with less and do it faster. If we look at AI, our latest big technology boost in the past year, I think it's wonderful. I mean, going from a blank page, I have to write something, a proposal, a blog post, an article. I just write down some of my thoughts, and it really takes that blank page and crafts it to something that I can now take, edit, and move forward.
Yeah.
What used to take me a day or so to write an article, I can now do in an hour. And it's just moving faster, right? So AI is just one of the latest examples that do that. On the way here, in the airport, I walk through the magazine rack, see if there's something I want to buy and read, which half the time I ignore and fall asleep anyway. But there was a cover, and it said that AI is the fastest moving technology in technological history,
Right.
right?
Wow.
So love it, hate it, doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's
Yeah.
coming, right?
So, there's a term called Luddite. It's like a person who's like anti-technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are these people who are kind of clinging onto the old ways of doing things, and maybe even with some pride,
Yes.
where they say, I'm old-fashioned. I do things the old way. And there's people who are talking about AI like, I don't want to touch that. And you've probably seen in your career
Yeah.
all sorts of patterns where people are stuck to the old way of doing, old way of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
having trouble embracing the new way or outright resisting.
Right.
How do you guide people as a coach, as an executive coach, particularly in these times where things just change faster and faster? How do you guide people through sort of the emotional journey of feeling the loss of the old way? I just finally got used to the way, and now how do you guide people so that they become masters of change and leaders through change?
I love that you said that there is someone in mind that comes up, and his name is, well, not his real name. I'll use Rob.
Uh-huh.
And Rob would say to me, well, I know what works. I have my processes, and I know that what they're going to deliver because I've used them over and over again. And I've talked to him about it, and I said, well, okay, tell me about your process. And he would say, well, I started out, it was like this, and then I changed it to this, and then I changed it to that. I said, wait a minute. You just used the word change 3 or 4 times in describing this to me. So you're tuning it, you're adapting it, you're making it better and better. Why do you do that? This is, well, sometimes I go into a situation and the old way didn't quite work, so I tune it to make it fit. I said, well, that's what we're talking about. We may be using new tools to help tune that.
Yeah.
We may not. You may have different people, different culture in a new company that won't work. So it's about experimenting is the word I love to use. Experimenting, does it work for me or doesn't it work for me? If it didn't, okay, how do I pivot? What's the next piece? How do I change? So it's all about adapting and tuning and changing.
Yeah.
It isn't, let's just throw it all out and change it just for the whatever of it.
I like this. Adapting, tuning, we're not throwing everything out. So you wrote a book for executives called The 6 Steps. What's the whole title?
The 6-Step Leadership Challenge.
Got it. And you talk about experiments. I'd like you to explain what that is. And I have a specific question about experiments, which is, how long should you try an experiment? Like, what if I try it for a day and I say, that doesn't work? Or maybe I should try it for a week. Do you have any kind of time frames for experiments? So feel free to share what's the book about, what's an experiment, and time frames.
So the book goes through 6 steps. First, about looking at you and what's around you and what's working and not working. Step 3 is about a vision. Where do you want to go? What's your North Star? And we define that. Then step 4 is now going to take that and put it into experiments, into what I call the LEAD framework, leaning into your story, vision, and strategy, empowering your stories, the execution part, amplifying your stories, all about people and culture and what are you going to do. The D is durability for your story. You don't want it to just do it once and that's it. So it's about executive presence and, excuse me. So durability for your story is about executive presence and life balance. So we're going to build experiments in those 4 places. Now, experiments we do all the time. We say, I'm going to run a pilot. Well, let's try this out for a while. Same thing. What I like about the word experiment, it brings to mind, to me, my 5th grade science fair project where we had a poster board and a hypothesis. Same thing. We think that if we do X, we're going to get Y. I think if I talk to my people more often, they're going to get what I need. I think if I talk more friendly to them, it'll be better. Well, what's the experiment? How often are you going to talk to them? How are you going to talk to them? Who are you going to talk to? And then how long is the experiment? I believe no experiment should be longer than 30 days, 1 month.
Okay.
Think small. I
Yeah.
know you hear a lot, think big, but here we're going to think small.
Yeah.
Because if we think too big and the experiment takes months and months and months to figure out, by the time you get to the end, you forgot you ran the experiment.
Mm.
And I hear people say, oh, we tried that. Well, what was the result? I don't know. It ran so long. We tried so many things at the same time.
So the experiment kind of helps you isolate the variable.
That's right.
Specific amount of time. Is it working?
Right.
Very good. Okay. So I know you work with a lot of executives. You help them not only perform at work, but talk about like what's the importance of family life and personal health and the whole picture of how you work with people.
Well, as I moved a little bit, shifting from just consulting, and I shouldn't say just because it's a lot of work, to coaching, I realize that people are holistic. There's our work life and there's our home life. We used to say before COVID and hybrid work, I have my work family, right?
Yeah.
And we have to act different at work than I do at home.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to go into a meeting and I have to wear a virtual suit of armor that to protect myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily true. Our authentic self, when we bring out our authentic self, both at home and at work, things work better. And when you have to work different at work, you're not being you, which sounds kind of fluffy, but the thing is, science proves that it takes significantly more energy to do that.
Uh-huh.
So you're using more energy than you need to.
Yeah.
And people, your organizations, want that authenticity. They want to know who they're working with. They want to know who they're working for. And they want to follow people that they want to follow. And then you get into differences of values between companies and people and things like that. But the whole thing about being authentic and balancing across, I'm one person.
Yeah.
And being authentic across that whole thing makes our health significantly better.
I'm curious, like in your coaching, when a coaching client would say something like, you know, Jim, I'm so stressed about my marriage, or I'm so stressed because my kids are, you know, having this health issue, something, you know, personal. Are you in your coaching style, or do you say, hey, well, that's your problem. We're going to focus on the professional stuff here. Or do you say, okay, well, like, let's figure out a plan for that? How do those worlds kind of connect in your coaching?
So there's some different things going on here.
Yeah.
And yes, people say, oh, yes, I'm having some family issues going on. And the thing is, there's a space between us that we created that my client can be open with me and tell me, because I'm not going to tell anybody. The ethics says I can't, so I don't. And sometimes they just need to get it off their chest and talk about it. And then we move on to something else. I have to be careful from a coaching ethics point of view.
Yeah.
Excuse me. From a coaching ethics point of view, not crossing into therapy.
Right.
Because that's not what I'm trained for.
What's the difference between coaching and therapy?
I put a simple description of, from a coaching point of view, we're looking forward. We have our North Star and how do we get there? Therapy more often looks back.
Oh, you know, I never thought of that.
Right?
That's very clear.
Right? What happens? Yeah. What happened? How does it make me feel? Discovering the triggers that created, and now I know how to act going forward because I recognize these triggers.
Yeah.
Now, I do a little bit of that because there are triggers that come into the workplace. And there's what I call the 4 fears of leadership. Fear of incompetence, which is we call imposter syndrome. There's a fear that I might say something and I'm going to appear foolish. There's a fear of failure, and there's a fear of being or appearing vulnerable, right? So I protect from those things. And often I would say, well, how do you know that's coming up? What's that feeling? There's something that triggered that. So again, I use the same thing. Well, what's triggering that fear? And the earlier in the timeline that you find that trigger, you can recognize it and say, I'm going to do something different. And fear, we were talking the other day, fear is just a waste of imagination.
That's right.
Love that line.
Yeah. You're hosting a retreat coming soon in Napa. Tell us about it.
Yes. I'm so excited about it. It's in Napa. We're going to have wine. So come. I think wine is amazing. Wine, since I moved to California, wine is all over the place, right? So, and I started to realize how much happens over wine. Business gets done over wine. Friends get together over wine. Family holidays come together. There's wine. So the retreat is about that, relationships. We start business, but we're going to become friends. And before you leave, we'll be family.
Lovely.
This is what it's about.
So who's it for and who's it not for?
I am looking for executives who want to move forward. If they're not ready to move forward, then this isn't the shiny new binder that's going to go on.
What's an example of moving forward?
Taking what you learned and actually doing something with it. And in this retreat, it isn't about a training class and this is what we're going to go over. It's about, well, what is it that you need? What is it that you have to do to move forward? What is stopping you? We're going to go through the 6 steps, put a set of experiments for you together for the next 90 days. But what's really magic about it is that after you leave, this is an adaptation tool. This allows you to be flexible, to adapt in whatever environment, because it gives you checkpoints to try things out. Where are my experiments? Where are they going? I don't have to wait to the end of the year. I pivot every 30 days. I'm taking a look at it. Where am I? Do I need to pivot? But it is not an excuse to change on a whim and just chase any shiny object.
Very exciting. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom, the 6-step leadership challenge, experiments, your upcoming retreats. Is there anything else on your mind that you would like to share before we wrap it up?
Yeah, come check me out. The retreat only has 12 people. So if you're interested in it, let me know, because once we're full, we're full.
Yeah.
But come talk to me. There's the book. I have a VIP session to help people kickstart things.
Yeah.
There's retreats. There's plenty of things to work with.
One last question about the retreat. What would you say is the number one challenge that this retreat will help with? What's the number one problem that people are struggling with that this retreat is really perfect for?
I would say that most of the time when people come to me, it's one of 2 things. I'm stuck. I can't, no matter what I do, I can't seem to move my career, move my project, or whatever it is. I feel stuck, suffocating. The second is we're in a new cycle. I'm starting a new job. I'm starting a new project. Seems kind of big and daunting. And yeah, I know I wanted it, but now I'm there. What do I do?
Yeah.
So if you're feeling stuck,
yeah,
or you're starting a new cycle,
yeah,
this is a great time to take a step back, reflect on what's working for you, what's not, and put that plan together, adaptable to move forward.
Beautiful. Beautiful.